We're going to read from Luke 6, verses 12 through 26. We're going to hear what Jesus had to say about how he makes it well for our souls. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When the morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles: Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor.
He went down with them and stood on a level place. A large crowd of his disciples and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coastal region around Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by impure spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him because power was coming from him and healing them all.
Looking at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you, and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven, for that is how their ancestors treated the prophets.
But woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets."
Father, I pray that as we dig into your word today, you would open our eyes to see what it is you want to tell us about what it means to be building our lives on unshakable ground. And in particular, Lord, building our happiness, our well-being on something that's unshakable. Lord, teach us today, we pray in your name. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. The 2004 Ukraine election was a mess. There was a challenger to the entrenched party. His name was Viktor Yushchenko. And the challenger, they almost killed him. They tried to assassinate him. They tried to rub him out, get rid of him. But he survived. And election day came. And as they did exit polls, it seemed very clear that the challenger, Viktor Yushchenko, was going to win. He seemed to be ahead. But when the day was done, the government, through just outright fraud, reversed the results. Philip Yancey writes about this in his book called What Good Is God? And he talks about the events that happened. He said that night, the state-run television put out a report, and the news anchor read the script that they were supposed to read, and they said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we announce that the challenger, Viktor Yushchenko, has been decisively defeated." However, what the government authorities had not taken into account was that on Ukrainian television, on the news, they had a little box in the bottom right corner where they had someone doing sign language, translating what the anchor was reading into signs so that deaf people who were watching could understand what was being said. And so they handed the script to the news anchor, but no one handed a script to this person doing the sign language in the bottom right corner of the screens. They were just supposed to sign what they were hearing being said. But that night, the woman doing the signing, who had been raised with deaf parents, she didn't go along with script. In fact, she began signing something completely different out to all the deaf people watching in the Ukraine. And this is what she signed to them. She said, "I am addressing all the deaf citizens of Ukraine. Don't believe what they say. They are lying, and I am ashamed to translate these lies. Yushchenko is our president." No one in the studio knew what she was saying. No one from the government knew what she was saying, but all the deaf people in the Ukraine knew what she was saying, and they picked up their phones and started to text all their other friends. And news spread and went viral around the nation there, and reporters started to stand up and refuse to report the false results. And that group of deaf people, started with that woman, began what was known as the Orange Revolution. And people marched out on Kiev, and all wearing orange and carrying orange balloons and orange signs. I've got a picture of it here somewhere. It'll show up. And a million people out there insisting, we need a new election. We're not going to settle for the fraud that happened. And the government buckled. They had new elections. And this time, Yushchenko was elected, undisputed, the winner. And then Yancey makes this point. He says, like the sign language translator in the lower right-hand corner of that screen, along comes a person named Jesus who says, in effect, don't believe the big screen, they're lying. It's the poor who are blessed, not the rich. Mourners are blessed too, as well as those who hunger and thirst, and the persecuted. Those who go through life thinking they're on top will end up on the bottom, and those who go through life feeling they're at the very bottom will end up on top. After all, what does it profit a person to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Last week, we started this series walking through what is known as Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. The plain is the level area in the valley. It's usually a vast level area in a valley between mountains. So that's where Jesus is. He's standing in this plain, and he calls his followers, all his disciples, he calls them to him, and he chooses 12 of them and says, you're going to be my apostles. You're going to be you're going to be the ones out there being the advocate, carrying my message out into the world. And if you're hearing echoes when I say that of the 12 tribes of Israel, then good, you should. This is Jesus establishing God's people anew. That's what he's doing here, standing on that long, vast, level plain between the mountains. But it's not just the disciples who are around him or his now new 12 apostles. It's also crowds of people who've come from every nook and cranny around Israel and beyond even to get to Jesus, hoping that he'll change the circumstances of their lives because they're sick, they're hurting, they're poor, they're hungry, they're possessed, they are outcasts in every way, and they're just hoping that Jesus will do something to change their circumstances and they can have some relief, some joy in this life. And in the middle of healing these people and caring for them, Jesus starts to talk to his disciples about what happiness is and what it means to be happy. Now, the word Jesus uses translates, it's their word for happy, but they didn't use their word for happy the way we use our word for happy. Our word for happy is kind of lighthearted and sometimes just silly. But their word for happy, the reason we translated our Bible, say blessed, is because it's a deeper word, it's a richer word. It talks about a well-being, long-term well-being. In other words, you're in a good place. You're in a great position. It's kind of like saying, oh, so good for you. You are in the best position, the best place possible. Everything is well with you. That's what's loaded into this word Jesus uses when he says, blessed are you, or happy are you when these things happen. Like the woman in the corner of the TV screen, Jesus is signing to anyone who can understand him that the world is lying about happiness, about being well. And he is exposing that lie. And in exposing the lie, Jesus points us toward the truth about where happiness actually comes from. And so this morning, our goal is to do a couple things. One, we want to understand the lies that Jesus is exposing here in what he says. Two, we want to also really quickly understand there's a common mistake that people have made from what Jesus says here, and they've gotten twisted and distorted it and confused about it. So we want to avoid that mistake. And then we want to hear what Jesus says about where unshakable happiness comes from. I know you want to know where unshakable happiness comes from. I know your lives and my life, especially through this past year, we really long for a happiness that is unshakable. So let's start with the lies. Picture Jesus standing there in this expansive, wide open, flat area, a plain with mountains off in the distance. Everyone, it helps me, it's like a word picture. Everyone he's talking to and all their friends, all the people coming to him, he tells his disciples, they're thinking about happiness like it's climbing a mountain. You've got to avoid the obstacles that would get in the way and keep you from getting the happiness at the top, and you've got to find the best pathways up that mountain and avoid the ones that, are too difficult, but find the easiest pathways to get up the mountain, because that's when you get there, you'll arrive at happiness and everything will open up and you'll be able to see. Have you ever climbed to the top of a mountain or even a big hill or maybe up a skyscraper, and you just see, and everything just feels so wide open and expansive, and the air is more breathable and all that stuff, and it's fresh and all that stuff? That's how everyone thinks about happiness, that it's something that you climb up, you work at, you struggle, you earn, you achieve, and then you arrive at happiness by going up the right paths and avoiding the bad obstacles. And if you step back and look at what Jesus is saying to the disciples, his followers, from a big picture perspective, he's saying that those obstacles to happiness, they're not really obstacles. That's a lie. And those pathways to happiness, they're not really pathways to happiness. That's a lie. Obstacles that aren't obstacles. Jesus provokes us. He says, are you poor? Oh, good for you. Are you hungry? Oh, okay, wow, I'm so happy for you that you're hungry. Are you sad and mourning? Wow, I envy you for that. Do people talk bad about you? Do they hate you? Do they slander you? Do they reject you? Which is supposed to be a progression, actually, from bad to worse. Hate is how they feel, and then they talk bad about you, they slander you, that's now verbal, and then rejection is this physical, like, get out of here. Like, it's, this progression from bad to worse. Except with Jesus, he's saying, no, that's a progression from good to great. No, this is all great. And that's how a lot of people read it. Jesus isn't just saying that he's not just saying that they're not obstacles to happiness. He's saying that they're actually indicators that, no, you're in a good place. But that can't be true, can it? I mean, I know most of you sitting here and watching from home, that you assume it's true because Jesus said it, but it can't be true. Can it be true that, all these things, that hunger and poverty and sadness and rejection, can it be true that they're good? Well, hold on. Jesus didn't say they're good. He said they're not obstacles to happiness. That's what he said. He didn't call them good. He said they're not obstacles to happiness. They're not obstacles to being blessed. They're obstacles that aren't really obstacles. This week, my wife and I had run up to Maine to the family cabin that we have up there, and I was trying to install a light fixture on the little garage we have that would sit on the outside and light up if you walk by, just so, she's not as scared when I make her take the dog out late at night. So, I bought all my stuff here. I bought my junction box to splice in the electrical wire that was already there, and I brought my outside box that'll connect the light to. And so I get there, I start taking stuff apart. I disconnect the fixture, pull the wire back, splice in the new wire, run the new wire with the old wire and another new wire. Just connect it all up. It's all working amazingly, and it's fine. Everything's great. There's power to everything. And now the last thing I have to do is just connect the actual light fixture. And so I climb up the ladder to this light fixture sitting at the top, right up under the roof, and I thought, oh, this is good. They gave me 2 sets of screws. They gave me 1 set of screws that are 1 inch long, 1 set of screws that are 3/4 of an inch long, so one of them is going to be fine. And so I pick the 3/4 inch size, and I start to put them through the light fixture into the box that I'm connecting them to. And they were plenty long, except the problem was they were too thin. They just kind of slid right in and out of the hole. They were number 8 screws instead of number 10 screws. I'm like, oh, great. Oh, but wait. I almost lost my happiness. It almost became an obstacle to happiness. But then I remembered, oh, the box I'm connecting to, that came with a couple screws. That'll be wide enough. They'll be number 10 screws. I'll just grab those. So I grab those screws, I climb up the ladder, and I start putting it in, and I realize, oh, do you know how long those screws were? They were only 1/2 inch. 1/4 inch too short. So now what that means up there, where we are in the woods, I've got to drive 1/2 an hour to a hardware store to buy 2 stupid screws. And then 1/2 an hour back. Guess what that felt like to me? That felt like an incredible obstacle to my happiness that day. Very disturbing, as great as I felt about, oh, this is so wonderful. I had to drive away with that light fixture hanging there from the top, not done. And that felt like an incredible obstacle to my happiness. But what if there's a happiness that can't be shaken by things like that? Moments like that you and I go through 1,000,000 times a day. What if there is such a thing as unshakable happiness? Jesus says there is, and he says obstacles aren't really obstacles to happiness, not real happiness. And then he goes after the paths that aren't really paths. And so he starts to pronounce these woes, and woe means, oh, hey, watch out. You're standing on a dangerous spot. You're in a dangerous place. You're not in a good place if you're rich or full or laughing or have people fawning over you and admiring you. And that makes no sense to us either. I mean, if you went to a friend at work tomorrow and read this to them, they would say, wow, Jesus sounds nuts. That makes no sense at all. That's the opposite of what reality is. The way to have happiness is you want to have good friends who admire you. You want to do well in life and get more money. These are pathways that lead you to feeling like you have a happier, more secure, well-off, it is well with me life. I mean, what would make you happier than if you went into work tomorrow and your boss said, hey, we're going to give you a 50% raise? See? What makes you happier than a good meal? I remember the first time Christina and I, after we moved here from New York, found a pizza place that was halfway decent. We took a bite and we were like, oh, yes, we can find decent pizza outside New York. Like, what's better than a good meal? What makes you happier than a good laugh? And what makes you happier than having people like you and say nice things about you? These are, as far as we're concerned, all pathways to happiness. So why would Jesus say, whoa, whoa, as though I'm standing in a puddle with an electrical wire dancing around next to it and almost about to shock me to death? This can't be true, can it? Can wealth and having a full belly and laughter and acceptance really be bad things? Well, again, Jesus doesn't say they're bad things. What he says is they are not pathways to happiness. And let's just understand the big picture of what Jesus is doing here and what he's saying, what he's going after. He's taking on our whole mindset about chasing happiness and well-being, that the way to do it is to avoid the obstacles in life that might set you back and find the smoothest paths, and that's how you're going to get to happiness and arrive at happiness, by climbing and getting to that place where everything opens up and you'll arrive there. That's what Jesus is taking on, this idea that you can climb and get there. And Jim Carrey agrees with Jesus. I don't know what that means to you, but the actor Jim Carrey agrees with him and said one of the best things I've ever heard said about this. He said, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. Then in an interview he had with someone, he said this, and he's a joker if you don't know him. He fools around a lot, so this is all tongue-in-cheek what he says here. He says, I am a 2-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. When I go to sleep at night, I'm not just some guy going to sleep. I am 2-time Golden Globe Award winner Jim Carrey going to get some well-needed shut-eye. And when I dream, I don't just dream any old dream. No, sir. I dream about being 3-time Golden Globe Award-winning actor Jim Carrey, because then I would be enough. It would finally be true, and I could stop this terrible search for what I know ultimately won't fulfill me. There's someone who has climbed to levels of success that you and I don't know. Levels of wealth, levels of people fawning over them and loving them that you and I don't know. And he stands there saying, this ain't it. This ain't it. These paths didn't get me anywhere. Why is it a lie? Why are these paths lies? Why are these obstacles not really obstacles? Because all these obstacles and all these paths to happiness, they're just so shakeable, like the sand we talked about last week. Have you not ever heard of a rich person who lost everything? It happens every day. Have you never heard of someone winning the lotto and all of a sudden becoming rich, but it ruins their lives? Whole TV shows and series have been put together about that. Have you ever heard of someone losing their good reputation in an instant because of something they said or posted, even accidentally? These things don't lead you to a mountaintop where your life opens up and becomes more expansive. They actually narrow you down. You become more afraid of obstacles, more anxious to find easier paths. There is no more open air. It actually constricts around you, like we talked about last week. You get more money, so you buy a nicer house, you buy a nicer car, you buy nicer clothing, you go to nicer restaurants, and before you know it, you don't get as much pleasure from the things that aren't as nice. You don't enjoy things if they don't have the cachet attached. This is human nature. Your kids do it all the time. How do they figure it out by the time they're in middle school and even before? That, if I don't have the sweatshirt or the sneakers that say this on them, then I'm not as good. I won't be as happy, Mom, if you buy me a Huffy bicycle. That's what I got my first bike. A Huffy? Schwinn, BMX, let's go. How can I be happy with this thing? Right? That's how we get. I read an article the other day about Toyota. Toyota makes Land Cruisers. They're one of the best utility vehicles in the world. Like when we've done trips in Africa to like really remote places, these are the vehicles that you take when your life depends on it. And you got to get through some crazy ground and crazy land. These are rugged vehicles built for rough work. And they've come out with a new series. They're like $60,000 to $80,000, these vehicles, because they'll stand up to almost anything. And what the new ones came out this year, and they had crank windows. Do you remember crank windows? Right? We had a crank window car just like, 15 years ago. That was the last time we had a crank window car, Christina and I. Most of you don't know. Now you push a button, the window goes down. You used to have to crank it. And they put crank windows in because, hey, you don't want a whole bunch of electronics that can fail you when you're out in the middle of nowhere. This works. So boom, crank window, because this is a utility vehicle for going where no one else is going. But all the rich people who like to buy those vehicles, because it feels really cool to have that vehicle and show up at the mall, because if the apocalypse hit, they can drive over the zombies on the way home, right? They're upset because I can't buy a car with a hand crank window. What are you talking about? What kind of statement does that make? I want a car with windows where I just think and they go down, right? But it's because why? I can't be satisfied with this any longer because I've trained myself. It narrows you, this pursuit of happiness through these different paths, worrying about these different obstacles. Slowly and slowly you become narrower. I remember one of our trips to Tanzania, working alongside the people who live there on the edge of the Serengeti in a town called Mugumu. And we just had so much fun just building what we could build without much electricity, with a generator that, I kid you not, was running on a gum wrapper, holding the electrical circuits together. It was nuts, and it was so much fun. And the last day, we took out some bags of candy, and it was probably dozens and dozens of kids, but it felt like 200 were suddenly there around us from the town. And we were just giving out candy, and just the joy and the fun of just getting a piece of candy. Kids here are like that a little bit too with candy, right? Then I pulled a Frisbee out of my bag and just chucked it. And you would have thought, like, I don't know what just showed up, because everyone went nuts. It was the most fun I'd ever seen people have with a Frisbee, a round disc of plastic. What would happen if you gave your kid a Frisbee for Christmas and that's it? And like, where's the remote? Where's the batteries go in? What am I supposed to do with this? Where's the virtual reality goggles that come with it, right? What do you do? Because why? We get narrower and narrower by these pursuits of pleasure. We become unable to experience pleasure. That's what begins to happen to us. I'm not saying that you become totally unable to enjoy a hot dog on the street, but I'm sure you've met people, and maybe you felt it yourself, this pull where, well, no, I've got to have that one, because, that I know it costs like 50%, 100% more, but, that's the one. That's the good one. Got to have that. Let me show you how this works in the extreme. Consider someone who's suffering from an addiction. Do they become better and better at enjoying life, or narrower and narrower in their ability to enjoy life? Do they become wide open and free, and so they take pleasure in everything, or do they become whittled down to a nub? Whatever the addiction is. They get to the point where they're only capable of enjoying that thing in that specific way, and then they begin to turn their back on and even use the other things we consider pathways to happiness and joy, like friends and food and wealth and all that stuff. They just use all of it, abuse all of it, just to get that one thing, the only thing that can make them happy. That's what happens to us. That's what sin does to us. It destroys and it decays and it makes us unhuman. And I know that's not you, but some of you have been in that place. Maybe some of you are even flirting with that place with some kind of addiction in your life. And it's narrowing you. I can't be happy until I get this thing. I just need that little bit of that thing. Right? Whatever it is. Whatever it is. Maybe it's just peace and quiet. And you just have to have that, and you're just no joy, no rest, until everyone just leaves you alone. Ultimately, what Jesus knows is that this is what happens to everyone who tries to find their way to happiness by climbing a mountain and arriving there and achieving it, and looks at life like, oh, I've got to avoid the obstacles that get in the way of my happiness because they crush me, and instead just find the easiest paths to get to happiness because they don't lead to wide open places, and Jesus knows that. That's why he's telling his disciples, here's the truth about happiness. That's why he's there in the corner signing it so everyone can see. Here's the truth about happiness. All these people coming to me who are sick and broken, They could be happy even in the midst of their sickness and brokenness. They don't have to wait for healing, because even that healing isn't necessarily going to make you feel all of a sudden better. I saw the perfect quote about this week on Twitter. Someone posted and said, the two worst feelings in the world are not having a job and having a job. Think about that for a moment. That's how messed up we are. Can we possibly be happy in a world where that's kind of true of us? Jesus looks out at the crowd, the disciples, at you and me, and it breaks his heart that we're caught up in this lie. So he's frantically trying to point us to real happiness and to understand and to expose those lies. But along the way, we also have to understand there's a mistake that you and I can make. We can get confused about what Jesus is saying here as he's there signing in the corner. I've never known sign language. I know a few things. I know, help. And they're all just from like kids' church and teaching kids words from songs. Lord. I learned from a 1-year-old how to say, this is more. I'd like more, please. Literally taught that by a 1-year-old. But I don't really know sign language, and so I would be very confused if I were trying to understand what someone was saying. Christina's been trying to learn it. I'll watch her sitting at our kitchen table in front of her laptop sometimes when she's just taking a break from other stuff, and she'll just be like making hand motions at the computer. I'm thinking, what, is she nuts? What, do I have to take her to somewhere? But she's practicing sign language, and occasionally I'll think, oh yeah, I know what that means, but I really don't know what that means, and I get confused by it. A lot of people have confused what Jesus has said here. They've started to call poverty and hunger and sadness and sorrow and rejection. They've started to say, oh no, those are the good things, and that's how your life should be. That's how you know you're really a Christian. That's what your life's supposed to be. That's good. And they've said that, having food and having money and having laughter and having people speak well of you are bad and evil, and you've got to avoid them. That message has come through at times as people have twisted what Jesus has said here. Christina and I were watching a show called Somebody Feed Phil the other day. It's this guy who just travels the world, goes to different places, makes friends with everybody, and just eats different food. And they were in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And he gets in a boat, and what caught my attention was the guy he was meeting was a guy named Anders, and I don't meet many other people named Anders. And he gets in the boat with him, with my namesake, and they start to talk, and he's like, hey, because he talks like this. He's like, Denmark's like, the top most happiest country in the world, right? Everybody's supposed to be the most happy people, like top 3 most happy people. Why do you think that is, Anders? And my namesake broke my heart with what he said. He said, about 15 years ago, we stopped listening to the church because the church told us that, happiness and joy and everything that was good was bad. And we weren't supposed to do that. We were just supposed to always be somber and serious and have none of that frivolity. But 15 years ago, we stopped listening to them, and now we're like one of the happiest countries in the world, happiest people in the world. And that broke my heart because that's an example of how people thinking they're following Jesus are actually following something they've made up about Jesus. And that's what Jesus is trying to counteract here. Could it be that there are times when the church is there presenting some message on the big screen and Jesus is in the corner saying, no, that's not true. That's not what I said. That's not what I'm meaning. That's not what I'm trying to do in your lives. That we're just playing along with the idea that, and now what we're doing is we're taking things that everyone thought were obstacles and we're saying, oh no, that's now the path to real happiness. The path to happiness is be as sad as you can, be as hungry as you can, starve yourself, be as poor as you can. Like that's how you'll get to real happiness. No, that's not what Jesus was saying. He was saying those things aren't obstacles to the real happiness. And he was saying those other paths are not real paths, but he wasn't trying to make a new path that's opposite bizarro world path. And that's why Jesus says to them, look, you're blessed when you're poor and hungry and broken and all that on account of me. Because you're living in a world that rejects God. And so, when you go through those things because the world is rejecting God and you're refusing to go along with it, you're refusing to go along with those lies, that false election stuff from Ukraine, you're refusing to go along with all the lies that the world is telling about everything, about pursuit of happiness, if that's why you're suffering and being rejected because you're not going with those lies, then yes, you're in a good place, regardless of what else is happening to you and around you, because you're not going along with the lies. You're in a good place because you're with God. And that means that all that stuff, it's not an obstacle to your joy. but also recognize they're not paths to joy. So Jesus says, look, you're blessed when you're hungry, poor, and mourning, hated, and rejected, not because they're good things, but because that has happened to everyone, all the people who've been closest to God throughout human history. They can't be bad things, because ultimately, what is Jesus promising? He's promising that if we stick with him, those things that look like obstacles to joy aren't really obstacles to joy. And we don't have to go crazy trying to climb paths that aren't really paths. But we will get all the wealth of the kingdom of heaven. We will get all the resources and food he has to give us. We will get all the joy and laughter and healing and all the praise he has to give us. Those are good things, but not when they come at the expense of our relationship with God. Not when they come because we've turned our backs on God. They're good things in the context of receiving them from him. That's why Jesus also says, watch out if you have wealth and fullness and laughter and favor and everyone's approval, because that's often happened to the people who are the biggest opponents of God, who were buying into the biggest lies about God. In this world, that's often the way it's been. But here's the truth, and hear this. The people who are blessed have always been the people who don't worry about either one of these lists, who don't worry about the obstacles and don't worry about these things being pathways. They don't worry about that at all. All they worry about is relationship with God, knowing God and being in him. That's all they worry about. And right there is the clue that you and I need to help us recognize where genuine, real, unshakable happiness comes from. There is no path to happiness. Let that sink in with you for a moment. There is no path to happiness. That's all a lie. There is only the path that happiness blazed to you and to me, because Jesus is our happiness. Jesus is our well-being. We only have well-being in him. There's no path to scrap and climb. There's no obstacles to avoid. He blazed that path to you and me so that we could have and experience and live in this happiness. That's what Hebrews is talking about. Hebrews 12, 1-3 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us by Jesus, who blazed the path, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus blazed this path to us. He brought this well-being, this happiness, this it is well to us. You don't follow a path and get there. All those paths are lies. They can't get you there. Jesus blazed it to you, made it possible for it to be well with my soul, because he took all these things that rob our joy and he killed them on the cross and he buried them in the tomb and he left them there to rot, but he rose from the dead and overcame all that stuff to bring you and I the foundation of real happiness that's unshakable. When it's planted in what he's done, there are no obstacles to that happiness. There are no pathways you have to climb to that happiness. Jesus brought it to you. And all the things that happen to you and me that frustrate us every day, they do not need to be obstacles. We can live in that happiness. We can experience that happiness from him. And when you have that, do you know what that does to all those other lies and all the obstacles about the paths and all that stuff? It sets you free from them. Now you and I can put aside all the weight of worrying about hitting obstacles to our happiness, all the weight of trying to find the right path to get money, to get food, to get happiness, to get friends. We can put aside all the weight of that weighs us down, and we can just run in the freedom that Jesus blazed this path for us. What a contrast that is to the way we were living without Jesus. What a difference compared to the way we were living when we didn't have Jesus. Always burdened by our circumstances. Always hoping, like all the crowds around Jesus in this moment, that we'd get free from our circumstances and not realizing we can be free even in the midst of our circumstances when we grab hold of and plant our happiness on this foundation that Jesus has brought it to us. That's what Jesus gives us. And the reason he's telling his disciples this is not just so that they can experience it. It's like, why is he telling them that in the middle of this crowd of people who are so needy? After he's just called the 12 to be his apostles to go out and be his voice in the world. Why is he talking about it here? Because he doesn't want them to only experience this happiness that only he can give. He wants them to become conduits of this happiness. And the same is true for you and me. He doesn't only want you and I to experience this happiness that nothing can shake, this well-being that nothing can shake. He wants you and I to become conduits of this as well, so that you and I can tap into this where no poverty or hunger or sadness or anything anybody says about us can take it away. But instead, they'll be like we're tapped into a river that flows in us and through us. Jesus once stood up in the middle of the market somewhere and said, in Jerusalem, and said, "Let anyone who's thirsty come to me and get a drink. Whoever believes in me, out of their belly will flow rivers of living water." In other words, he was talking about the Holy Spirit that he pours out in us and through us. Anyone who comes to him, you step into this river. Worship team, would you come back? You step into this river of joy, of peace, of well-being, of unshakable happiness. And that becomes the source that overwhelms everything else around you. All the obstacles that are plaguing you, all the desperation to find right paths, all that stuff washes away because you've got this unshakable source that doesn't just fill you, but then just spills out of you. That's what I want and what Jesus wants for every one of you today. If you can pay attention to Jesus in the corner of the screen, signing to you, what he's saying to you is, this is unshakable happiness. I am bringing it to you. I died to bring it to you. Choose. What life do you want to live? The one of scratching and clawing and trying to avoid the obstacles and find the right paths that maybe you'll get to that place and then you'll be happy? Or do you want to throw all that aside and instead choose to just open your arms and say, Jesus, forgive me for my sin, forgive me for going my own way, save me, make my life new. Which path do you want to walk? The one that constricts you and chokes you so that you can't build anything that lasts, or the one that opens you up into the vast expanse that Jesus opens up for you and me? We can build a life and we can be part of this river that brings life to this world, to new creation. What do you want to be part of? Choose.